Okay, picture this. You're walking through a super busy city square. It's a gorgeous day out, sun's shining. There are literally hundreds of people swarming all around you. Folks grabbing coffee, chatting, walking their dogs. But then, out of nowhere, you feel this massive, agonizing pain in your chest. You drop to the pavement, you can't breathe, you literally can't speak. You are in serious, immediate trouble. But you look up, right? And you figure, hey, I'm okay. I'm surrounded by a total sea of humanity here. Someone's going to rush over. Someone's definitely pulling out their phone to call 911. But then the absolute unthinkable happens. Nobody moves. Not a single person steps forward to help you. People kind of glance at you. Maybe they slow down for a split second, but then they just keep walking. They step right around you. The whole crowd just flows past you like water around a rock. You're surrounded by hundreds of capable human beings, and yet you are completely and utterly alone. Sounds straight out of a horror movie, right? Well, as we're going to see in today's explainer, this is actually a very real, incredibly well-documented psychological phenomenon. In fact, the research shows that your odds of getting help can literally plummet by over 50% just by adding a few extra people to the crowd. So let's really unpack this, because what we're talking about here completely shatters this universal assumption we basically all have. I mean, since we were kids, we're conditioned to believe that having a ton of people around equals safety, right? Safety in numbers. We're told, hey, if you're walking home late at night, stick to the crowded streets, or if you need help, go where the crowds are. But the reality, the actual psychological math here, is totally terrifying. The reality is that a big crowd actually equals danger. It's this massive, terrifying paradox of human psychology. When you're in a real emergency, a huge crowd is not some cozy safety net. It's actually a giant dampener on human empathy and action. Which brings us to the big, million-dollar, kind of terrifying question. Why on earth does your chance of being rescued actually drop as a crowd gets bigger? Just think about that for a second. It completely defies logic. I mean, if there's one person walking by, you've got one shot at being saved. So logically, if there are 50 people walking by, you should have 50 shots. The odds should totally be in your favor. So why is it that in the real world, if you're having a medical emergency, statistically speaking, you are way safer if there's just one single person in that alleyway with you compared to being surrounded by 50 people in a busy plaza? What exactly is short-circuiting in the human brain that turns a group of totally normal, decent people into this unfeeling, unresponsive mob? Well, to answer that, we've got to look at the actual neuroscience. What we're dealing with here is called the bystander effect. Basically, it's this incredibly common phenomenon where individuals are way less likely to offer help to a victim if other people are around. And pay attention to the phrasing there, right? It's not that they can't help, it's that the mere presence of other people actively suppresses their willingness to step up. We aren't talking about a crowd full of malicious, terrible people here. We're talking about a biological, psychological glitch in how our brains process emergencies when we're in a social setting. When a group gathers, the individual brain just kind of shuts down its urgent response mechanisms. And the way that mental shutdown happens is absolutely fascinating. Psychologists call it the diffusion of responsibility. Imagine the burden of stepping up to help as a whole pie. When you are the absolute only person witnessing an emergency, 100% of that moral burden, the whole pie, falls squarely on your shoulders. Your brain knows, hey, this is entirely up to me. But the second you add a crowd into the mix, that collective brain takes that moral burden and slices it up into these tiny, totally ineffective little fractions. You might take a teeny tiny sliver for yourself thinking, okay, that's my share of the responsibility. And your brain just assumes the rest of the crowd is holding the rest of the responsibility pie. But here's the kicker. Because absolutely everyone in that crowd is doing that exact same subconscious math, the vast majority of the moral burden just goes totally unclaimed. The responsibility diffuses. It just evaporates into thin air. Because everyone assumes somebody else is handling it, absolutely nobody handles it. The whole crowd just becomes completely paralyzed. So how does this paralysis actually play out in the real world? It spirals into what's known as the brain's paralysis loop. When an emergency happens, it's usually super chaotic and ambiguous. People are confused. So your brain's very first instinct is to desperately seek out social cues from others. You look around, trying to see how everyone else is reacting. Are they panicking? No? Well, then maybe it's not a real emergency, right? But remember, and this is the crazy part, literally everyone else is doing the exact same thing. They're all looking at you to see if you're panicking, which leads straight to the next part of the loop, assuming someone else is going to act first. You're thinking, well, if this is really serious, surely that guy in the suit over there is going to step up, or hey, maybe someone's already dialed 911. And the tragic, real-world result of this endless mental loop? Collective inaction.
a total trance. The brain gets completely trapped in this weird loop of waiting for permission from the group, which just leads to this eerie total crowd paralysis.
Okay, but here is definitely the most important takeaway from this entire explainer. We aren't just here to talk about how our brains fail us. We're going to talk about how you can actually take control back. You absolutely do not have to be a helpless victim of a crowd's biology. Because we understand the exact mechanics of the bystander effect, we also know exactly how to purposefully short-circuit it. There is a totally proven, scientific antidote, a way to psychologically force a rescue and snap an entire crowd right out of its trance. So, the absolute crucial thing to remember is this. If you ever find yourself in danger in a crowded place, you have to systematically destroy that diffusion of responsibility we just talked about. And here is exactly how you do it. Seriously, if you only remember one thing today, make it this. First, pick one specific person. Whatever you do not just yell, "Help me," to the general crowd. The crowd doesn't have a brain. Point to someone directly. Say, "You in the red jacket." By isolating them, you are taking that massive, unclaimed pile of responsibility and dumping 100% of it directly onto their individual brain. Second, make direct eye contact. This forces a really powerful, undeniable social connection that the human brain is literally hardwired to respond to. You're pulling them completely out of the anonymity of the mob. And finally, give a direct, undeniable command. Do not leave any room for ambiguity here. Say something like, "I am having a heart attack. Call 911 right now." By hitting those 3 specific steps, you completely shatter the collective trance. You bypass the crowd's paralysis loop entirely and you hack directly into one specific individual's action centers. It's literally a lifesaver. Now, we've just learned exactly how to defend against the totally terrifying silence of a crowd, but I actually want you to consider something else before we wrap things up today. The bystander effect is incredibly dangerous. Yes, absolutely. But at its core, the apathy of a crowd is an unconscious reflex. Like we said, it's a biological glitch. Those people aren't ignoring you because they hate you. They're ignoring you because their brains are temporarily paralyzed by those weird social dynamics. But what happens when silence is not an unconscious accident? That brings us to something so much more sinister, the dark side of silence. What happens when silence is deployed intentionally, right in our personal lives, entirely behind closed doors? I want you to just let this thought sink in for a second. The apathy of a crowd is completely unconscious, but the silence of an individual is a calculated weapon. Think about it. When a massive crowd ignores you, it's just a tragic failure of shared psychology. But when someone you know, someone you actually love, looks right at you and chooses to give you absolute crushing silence, that is an entirely different beast altogether. That is not a diffusion of responsibility. That is intentional psychological isolation. So you really have to ask yourself, is that silence an unconscious accident or is it a manipulative weapon? We've mastered exactly how to break the trance of totally random strangers on the street. But how on earth do you defend your own mental health when the person freezing you out isn't some random bystander, but someone living in your own home? The apathy of a crowd might just be a lack of awareness, sure, but in our personal relationships, intentional silence is a calculated tool of emotional abandonment. It is a hidden, dark psychology designed specifically to break you down. And honestly, that is exactly the dark reality we are going to decrypt next time when we expose the true anatomy of the silent treatment